You wake up in the morning, head to the kitchen, make your coffee, and without realizing it, you're doing that mental calculation that's become routine. Bread costs more. Coffee, too. Butter, don't even get me started. And you already know, before you even get to the checkout at the grocery store, that the money that was enough last month isn't going to cut it now. It's not your imagination. It's not poor budgeting. It's not an exaggeration. It's real. And if you're retired or preparing for retirement, you need to understand what's happening behind the scenes of the pension system, because there's a silent mechanism working every single day, slowly eroding the value of what you receive, and almost nobody is explaining this to you with the clarity you deserve. What's going to change about retirement in 2026 that nobody told you about isn't some new reform. It isn't some outrageous law or shocking measure announced in the news. It's something more subtle, more profound, and for that very reason, far more dangerous. It's the continuation of a system that no longer works for those who depend on it, but continues to be sold as a guarantee of dignity in old age. And while you expect to live comfortably after decades of work, what you're actually receiving in practice is an income that doesn't keep up with the life you need to live. Let's get straight to the point. When you retire on Social Security, you're not simply starting to receive a guaranteed monthly salary until the end of your life. You're entering a system where the amount you receive is determined by a series of rules that most people don't fully understand, and which are reviewed, adjusted, and readjusted over time in a way that, in theory, should protect retirees, but in practice leaves them increasingly vulnerable. The first point you need to understand is that the value of your retirement is calculated based on the average of your highest salaries throughout your life, considering your contribution time, and a series of factors involving age, type of retirement, and transition rules. But what nobody clearly explains to you is that from the moment you start receiving benefits, that initial amount will be adjusted every year, but adjusted in a specific way, using an index that measures inflation in a manner that theoretically should reflect the price increases affecting people's lives. And it's based on this that Social Security readjusts benefits. Sounds fair, doesn't it? Sounds like the system is protecting you from inflation. But that's exactly where the problem lies. And that's where the silent loss begins that erodes a retiree's purchasing power year after year, without them clearly perceiving it. The price index measures inflation, yes, but it measures a basket of goods and services that doesn't always reflect the retiree's reality. It considers food, transportation, housing, healthcare, clothing, and other items. But the way these items are weighted in the final calculation doesn't correspond to what actually weighs on the pocket of someone who has stopped working. A retiree spends proportionally much more on healthcare than a young person. They spend more on medications, on doctor visits, on health insurance that increases in price every year absurdly, far above official inflation. They spend more on food because they don't have the same mobility to shop for better prices, because they can't take buses and subways as easily, because they depend on a more expensive routine. And even if the index rises, even if the adjustment is applied, what happens in practice is that the benefit increase doesn't cover the real increase in cost of living. The retiree receives the adjustment, looks at the statement and sees that the amount went up, but when they go to the grocery store, when they pay the electric bill, when they buy medication, they realize money is still short. And they don't understand why. They think they're spending poorly. They blame themselves. They cut what they can, stop buying meat, stop going out, stop living with dignity. And even then the money doesn't stretch. Now imagine you've been retired for 5 years. When you started receiving benefits, the amount was enough to live with a certain comfort. It wasn't luxury, but was enough to pay the bills, buy food, pay rent or the mortgage, have some money saved for emergencies. 5 years have passed. You received all the annual adjustments, right on schedule, according to the law. The nominal value of your benefit has increased, but what you can buy with that amount has decreased. You no longer have the same safety margin. You can't save anything anymore. You start depending on children, on grandchildren, on favors. You start feeling like you're a burden. And this erodes not just your income, but your dignity, your self-esteem, your sense of autonomy. And all of this happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, because you don't see a sudden drop in the benefit amount. What you see is constant erosion, month after month, year after year, until suddenly you find yourself in a financial situation you never imagined living. And here's a crucial point that almost nobody explains to you. Social Security wasn't designed to maintain your standard of living. It was designed to give you a minimum income, basic protection, but never to guarantee that you'll live in old age with the same comfort you had while working. And this is a hard truth, but a necessary one. The pension system is a pay-as-you-go system, where those who are working today pay for those who have already retired. And this model works well when the young population is much larger than the elderly population, when the economy is growing, when there are formal jobs in abundance. But today's reality is different. The population is aging rapidly. People are living longer. The birth rate is falling. And at the same time, the labor market is increasingly informal, with millions of people working on their own, without formal employment, without contributing to Social Security, which means the system is receiving less money than it needs to pay current retirees. And the solution the government has found to balance the books isn't to increase revenue sustainably, but to tighten retirement criteria, increase contribution time, reduce benefit amounts, and apply adjustments that don't keep up with the reality of living costs. And what's going to change in 2026? The continuation of this process will change. The confirmation that the system won't improve for retirees will change. The certainty that those retiring now or in the coming years will face an even more difficult financial reality than those who retired a decade ago will change, because adjustments will continue to be insufficient, because the Social Security cap, which is the maximum amount someone can receive, will continue rising less than the inflation of essential costs, because transition rules will continue demanding more contribution time and higher minimum age, pushing people to work longer before they can retire, and because meanwhile healthcare costs, which are the biggest burden in the budget of those over 60, will continue rising uncontrollably without any real government intervention to protect retirees. Let's talk about real numbers, because it's in the day-to-day accounting that the system's cruelty becomes clear. A retiree receiving minimum Social Security benefits needs to pay rent, because most retirees don't own their homes. Rent in a mid-sized city, in a simple neighborhood, doesn't go for less than half of what they receive. They're left with just a few $100s for the month. With that, they need to buy food, pay electricity, pay water, pay gas, buy medications, pay transportation, buy hygiene and cleaning products. Nothing is left over. And if they have any health problem, if they need a medication that isn't covered, if they need a test that the public system can't schedule in time, they'll have to choose between eating or getting treatment. This isn't an exaggeration. It's the reality of millions of people who work their entire lives, who contribute for decades, who believe they will be protected in old age, and who today live on the edge of survival. And for those receiving above the minimum, the situation isn't much better, because the Social Security cap is frozen in practice. It goes up, yes, but it rises less than the real inflation of costs that impact those receiving more. Those at the Social Security cap generally have a slightly higher standard of living, live in better neighborhoods, have health insurance, have larger expenses, and the adjustment they receive doesn't keep up with the health insurance increase, which goes up 10, 15, 20% a year, doesn't keep up with the increase in homeowner association fees, doesn't keep up with property tax increases, doesn't keep up with the increase in electric bills, which have been rising brutally in recent years. The result is that even those who contributed at the maximum their entire lives, even those who did everything right, see their purchasing power decrease year after year and find themselves forced to reduce their standard of living, to cut expenses, to live with less than they thought they were entitled to. Now compare this with the reality of government employees. I'm not here to attack government employees, because many of them also work hard and deserve what they receive. But the difference is glaring and needs to be stated. A federal government employee, for example, retires with their full salary or very close to it, depending on which rule applies to them. They have adjustments that follow the adjustments of active employees. They have a pension system that is much more robust, much more generous, much fairer than Social Security. And meanwhile, the private sector worker who contributed their entire life to Social Security, who paid everything correctly, who never evaded, retires with benefit that barely allows them to live and which loses value over time. It's not fair. It doesn't make sense. And it's one of the biggest distortions of the pension system, which treats completely differently people who contributed equivalently throughout their lives. And there's another point that needs to be said with complete clarity. Social Security is not an investment. When you contribute to Social Security, You're not making savings. You're not putting money away for yourself. You're paying for the system to function. And the promise is that when your turn comes, other people will pay for you. But that promise only works if the system is balanced, if there are enough people working and contributing to support those who have already retired. And as we've already discussed, that balance is being lost. The population is aging, informality is growing, and the system is increasingly under pressure. What does this mean for those retiring now or in the coming years? It means the pressure on the system will increase, that the accounts will get tighter, and that the government will have to choose between raising taxes, cutting benefits, or tightening retirement rules even more. And any of these options is bad for workers. Now think about this. If you had taken all the money you contributed to Social Security throughout your life and had invested it yourself intelligently in private retirement accounts, in investment funds, in real estate, you would have a much larger estate than the amount you'll receive from Social Security throughout your retirement. Much larger. And you would have control over that money. You could pass it to your children. You could use it in an emergency. You would have autonomy. But the system doesn't give you that option. The system forces you to contribute, promises you protection, and delivers an income that isn't sufficient to live with dignity. And when you realize this, when you're already retired, it's too late to change. You're trapped in a system that doesn't work, but that you can't abandon. And the worst part of all is that this isn't new reality. This isn't a surprise. Economists, pension specialists, researchers, they've all known this for decades. Everyone knows the system is heading toward collapse, that the reforms that were made didn't truly solve the problem, only postponed the crisis. And even so, nothing changes structurally. Nothing truly changes. The reforms that are made always put the weight on the worker, always demand more contribution time, always reduce benefit amounts, but never attack the real causes of the problem, which are informality in the labor market, inequality between pension systems, lack of financial education among the population, lack of real incentive for people to plan for retirement independently. And here's a point nobody tells you, but which is absolutely essential. The biggest mistake you can make is thinking Social Security will solve your life in retirement. It won't. It wasn't made for that. It was made to be a supplement, a safety net, but never your only source of income. And if you're working today, if you still have time ahead before you retire, you need to understand that the responsibility for ensuring your dignity in old age is yours. It's not the government's. It's not Social Security's. It's yours. And the sooner you start planning, investing, building your own assets, the more peaceful your retirement will be. Because if you depend only on Social Security, you'll live tight. You'll live in fear. You'll live without the security you deserve after a lifetime of work. But going back to what's going to change in 2026, what's going to change is that the reality we're describing will become even clearer. It will become even more obvious. Because adjustments will continue to be insufficient. Because inflation of essential costs will continue pressuring the retiree's budget. Because the number of people retire will increase. And the system will have to distribute the same pie among more people, which means each slice will get smaller. And because a feeling of insecurity, of vulnerability, of lack of dignity will spread even more among retirees. And this isn't a small problem. It's not a problem that affects just a portion of the population. It's a problem that affects everyone. Because everyone ages, everyone will retire someday, and everyone will have to deal with this reality. And there's something that needs to be said loud and clear. The loss of purchasing power for retirees isn't just a financial issue. It's a mental health issue. It's a dignity issue. It's a quality of life issue. When a person retires thinking they'll live peacefully and suddenly finds themselves without money to pay bills, without money to buy food, without money to get treatment, they enter a state of constant stress, anxiety, depression. They lose the will to live. They lose hope. And this is an exaggeration. Studies show that financial insecurity in old age is one of the main causes of depression and even suicide among the elderly. And nobody talks about this. Nobody treats this as a priority. Retirees are invisible to society. They're a burden. They're a number in statistics. And when they can't take it anymore, when they give up, nobody asks why. Nobody connects the dots. Nobody understands that this is a direct consequence of a system that fails to protect those who need it most. And meanwhile, there are individual solutions. Yes, there are ways to protect yourself. Private retirement accounts are one. Investments in fixed income, in real estate funds, in stocks are others. Building assets throughout your life, buying property, ensuring you have passive income when you stop working, all this makes a difference. But these solutions require financial education, require discipline, require that you start early, and most people don't have access to this. Most people live paycheck to paycheck from the start, can't save, can't invest, and when retirement comes, find themselves completely dependent on Social Security, without alternatives, without room to maneuver. And then the situation becomes desperate. What's going to change in 2026 then isn't a specific law, isn't a shocking reform, isn't a bombastic announcement. What's going to change is a continuation of a process of silent erosion, of gradual loss of dignity, of constant squeeze that keeps pushing retirees more and more into a corner until they can't take it anymore. And this needs to be said. This needs to be understood. Because as long as we don't talk about this clearly, as long as we don't demand real changes, as long as we don't require that the system be truly reformed, thinking about workers and not just about government accounting, the situation will continue to worsen. And who will pay the price is me, is our parents, is our grandparents, is all the people who dedicated their entire lives to work and who deserve to live their old age with dignity, with security, with peace. And here's a reflection that may be the most important of all. Why do we accept this? Why do we accept that the pension system is so unfair, so inefficient, so cruel to those who need it most? Why do we accept that retirees are treated like a burden, like dead weight, like someone who's holding back the economy? Why don't we demand more? Why don't we push back more? The answer is simple. Because we don't understand the system. Because we don't know how it works. Because we don't perceive the severity of the problem until it knocks on our door. And when it knocks, it's already too late. We're already retired. We no longer have a way to change. We're already trapped in the machinery. And then we become a statistic. We become a number. We become just another retiree complaining that money doesn't stretch and nobody pays attention because everyone is complaining and because society has gotten used to thinking this is normal. But it's not normal. It shouldn't be normal. A just society, a society that values work, a society that respects the elderly, cannot accept that those who work their entire lives live in poverty in old age, cannot accept that retirees have to choose between buying food or buying medicine, cannot accept that the pension system is a lottery, where some do well and most do poorly. And if we want to change this, if we want the future to be different, we need to start talking about this now. We need to start demanding now. We need to start educating ourselves now, planning now, requiring that the system change now, because time passes quickly. You who are working today, who are at the peak of your productive life, who think retirement is far away, need to understand that it arrives in the blink of an eye. And when it arrives, if you haven't prepared, if you haven't built alternatives, if you depend only on Social Security, you're going to regret it. You'll look back and think, why didn't I do things differently? Why didn't I start earlier? Why didn't I plan? And then it will be too late, because retirement isn't a phase of life you can rehearse. It comes only once. And if you're not prepared, you're going to suffer. You'll live tight, in fear, in insecurity, and nobody deserves that. And for you who are already retired, who are living this reality now, who are feeling the squeeze firsthand, the lack of money, the loss of dignity, know that you're not alone. Millions of people are living the same thing. And know that this isn't your fault. You're not spending poorly. You're not exaggerating. You're a victim of a system that wasn't made to truly protect you. And what can you do? You can look for alternatives. You can seek out social programs, assistance benefits, senior discounts, ways to reduce costs. You can seek help from family, from friends, from communities. You can look for extra income if you're able. And above all, you can use your voice to demand changes, to require that the system improve, so that the next generations don't go through what you're going through. Because this is the truth nobody tells you. The pension system is broken. It doesn't work for those who need it. It doesn't guarantee dignity in old age. It doesn't protect workers. And as long as we don't recognize this, as long as we don't talk about this openly, as long as we don't demand structural changes, The situation will continue to worsen. Adjustments will continue to be insufficient. Inflation will continue eroding purchasing power. Retirees will continue living on the edge. And the promise of a peaceful old age will continue being a lie for most people. So what's going to change in 2026? The perception of those who haven't yet realized will change. The awareness of those who haven't yet understood will change. The reality of those who still think they're protected will change. Because 2026 isn't a different year. It's just another year on the calendar of a system that's been failing for decades. And that will continue to fail as long as we don't do anything to change it. And the time to do something is now. The time to get informed is now. The time to plan is now. The time to demand is now. Because after you retire, options diminish. Because after you're trapped in the system, room to maneuver disappears. And because nobody's going to do this for you. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to show up with a magic solution. The responsibility is yours. And the sooner you take that on, the better your future will be.